Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Remote and Hybrid Working, a Long-Term View digital event hosted by CMI Regional London Board. My name is Craig and I'm Events Coordinator at CMI. I'll be shortly handing over to David, who will introduce today's speakers. If you have any questions during the event, you can ask them using the live chat box to the right of your screen, and we will answer as many as we can during the Q&A. Today's session is being recorded and will be shared with you later today for those who book to attend. The event recording will also be available on the CMI website and CMI YouTube channel. Now over to David to begin today's event.
Thanks, Craig, and welcome everyone to today's event and what I think is going to be a really interesting discussion. Really pleased to have with me today Claire Campbell from the Institute for Employment Studies and Amy Butterworth from TimeWise. Welcome, Claire and Amy. I hope you're doing okay and not getting too overheated today in what is a crazy day for English weather, British weather, I should say. We hear a lot about hybrid working, and over the last couple of years, obviously that's become more prevalent. But I wonder, as we start to go back to what might be thought of as the new normal, what is the uptake of hybrid working looking like now, and what approaches are people taking to hybrid working? And Claire, I wonder if we can come to you first on this one.
Yeah, thank you, David, and good afternoon, everybody. So yeah, I work at the Institute for Employment Studies, and we look at a variety of kind of new ways of work and through research and evaluation and evidence. And one of our recent studies that we've done over the last couple of years has been looking at work after lockdown, so following employers with looking at how work patterns have changed over the last couple of years. So during the pandemic, we've known up to 70% of people in some locations were working from home, and then obviously that's dropped back and people have been trying to find the right ways of making hybrid work for their firm. But I still think we haven't given it a fair long-term test, because there's still fears about travel, fears about the pandemic impact and so on. So it's been a very prolonged sort of pilot, an experiment in hybrid working. But, our study showed in February this year, around 70% of people were working from home at least sometimes. And in professional roles and kind of central government, civil service and local government roles, more like 70% of people were working from home at least sometimes. So there's been a really big shift in how people are working from how they work pre-pandemic. We've also looked at what approaches people are taking to hybrid, because hybrid can mean a variety of things. Usually it's about flexibility in where someone works and this kind of combination of office and home working. So the most popular models that we've seen through our study have been, still probably the most prevalent one is a fair amount of individual flexibility and choice about where you work, and that certainly in some of those industries that I talked about, that's still quite prevalent, that people have a fair amount of choice. But there are other companies sort of setting the rules that you go in for certain meetings or certain events, and of course we've seen certainly in the profile in the press the option of kind of you must go back 2 days or 3 days a week being a popular option as well. The one that seems to have been the least popular or the least big change is a sudden shift to 5 days back in the office. There are a small number of organisations that's done that, but most people have either set this sort of quota of a number of days or left a fair amount of individual flexibility about where people are working.
And that certainly seems to be relevant at the moment when people are struggling to travel with strikes and difficulties and stuff. That must make situations like that much easier to manage and much easier to work with. Now people are used to working from home.
Yes, no, I agree. I think we've seen how easily a message could go out this week about it would be better if you didn't travel on public transport. It might be better if you work from home. So that technology has always been there, but it's now become much more normal than it was pre-pandemic.
Brilliant, thank you. Amy, what are your thoughts on this one?
Thanks, David. So yeah, I work for TimeWise. We're a social consultancy firm and we specialise in flexible working. So as you'd imagine, we've been very busy post-pandemic, but have been doing this for about 15 years. So a good track record prior to kind of the current focus on hybrid. And I'd really agree with what Claire's research has shown. That's what we're seeing in the work that we're doing with clients, that people are taking different views, but that kind of range of the amount of autonomy that you're giving a team or a leader tends to be the dimension that most organizations are kind of varying. You know, are you going to set a quota or set specific days? People talking about, you know, anchor days where they want everyone to come in and make that worthwhile. But I'd also agree with what Claire said, that I don't think we've yet really seen the kind of long-term embedding of this. I think we're kind of teetering on that now. And of course, now it's summertime and people are in and out over the next 6 weeks anyway. So yeah, I think an extended experiment is a good way of describing what we're working with. Yeah. Brilliant.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you if I can, because I think when, you know, Claire mentioned that this has been a long pilot and a pilot of necessity in some ways. But I guess, what do you think are some of the main challenges and opportunities for managers and leaders as we move forward in this way?
So we recently did some work researching with a number of organisations into the reality of hybrid work, you know, post-lockdown. And I think what that showed quite clearly was that there is a real set of benefits that can be accompanied by this new way of working. So, you know, the ability to attract talent from different sources, different locations, the ability to retain people because you're giving them more control and autonomy over their working week and how they like to work best, you know, higher levels of staff engagement associated with hybrid ways of working. Of course, there is a flip side, and you asked about the challenges as well as the opportunities. And I think we're seeing organisations concerned about potentially the emergence of different types of inequality that maybe they didn't need to think about before when everyone was working in a consistent way. Siloed working, so people being great at, you know, getting their head down at home and working on their own deliverables, or maybe working closely with their local team, but a feeling coming through that it's harder maybe to be connected to the organisation. And I think, you know, for some leaders and managers, hybrid working does represent a really different way of leading a team. For some people, they've been leading distributed teams in multiple locations for a while, and it probably feels less different. But I think the need to upskill leaders and managers came out really strongly as one of the primary areas of focus for the organisations that we conducted our research with. And I think that shows a recognition that actually in many cases this does feel very different for leaders and managers. I think the good news is there's lots that individual leaders and managers can do to make this a great way of working. And I think the other good thing is that we've seen a real increase, I think, since the kind of large scale move to remote working, we've seen a real increase in organisations talking to their employees. So surveys, listening groups, etc., really kind of going out there, engaging opinion about ways of working and how people are finding ways of working in a way that we haven't really seen, you know, en masse before. I think we would encourage managers to keep ways of working as a regular conversation. And I think that is the key to really harness those opportunities and build a sustainable way of working and mitigate against some of those concerns that organisations have.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think you're right. It's a while it's kind of been enforced, it's a challenge for leaders as well as it is for team members as well, isn't it? And I think some will cope better with that. And I think it's incumbent to all of us really to continue to provide support for managers and leaders in order for them to adapt to the new ways of working. We hear a lot about output driven or outcome driven rather than inputs and actually being fixed in an office. And in terms of flexible working, I know we at CMI are talking about outcomes all the time rather than inputs and outputs per se. But I guess, Claire, if I could come to you, and what do you think the effect on productivity will be from your research? Do you think it's going to be enhanced working in this way, or do you think there's going to be productivity will be compromised in some way?
Yeah, productivity has obviously been something people have been really interested in, and how is it going to be impacted, and sort of anecdotally whether it's got better or worse during the pandemic. I think the honest answer is there's very few studies which can actually show in a kind of quantitative way an impact on productivity, because we're very bad at measuring it in the majority of industries. There's very few industries that can actually, very discreetly measure productivity. So there are some limited studies in kind of sales environments which would indicate that a good percentage of home working actually increased performance. People felt they were able to kind of crack on with their sales targets, less likely to take time off sick, more likely to stay committed to the organisation. So there's limited studies which kind of are able to show the benefits. But what we have seen is plenty of self-reports around improved productivity. People think it enables them to do certain tasks better. Very often, as Amy alluded to, it's the eyes down tasks, and that may mean that's what they're thinking about when they think about being productive, rather than perhaps connecting with colleagues, more creative meetings, and other things that might be done well through interaction in an office. But what we also know positively impacts productivity and health and well-being through engagement is this feeling of choice and control over your work, your workload, when you're working. So I think that is something that hybrid working done well can enable. People feel they've got more choice over when they're working, they've got more control over the way they're working and their workload. So that it enhances then their commitment to the organisation and their productivity and engagement.
Yeah, I think we're seeing that in a lot of places, aren't we? But as you say, there are some industries, some areas of activity where it's really hard to measure that. Amy, what is your view on this?
I think productivity is something that is often asked about, and as Claire said, is very hard to measure. And we are often reliant on self-reports. At TimeWise, quite a lot of the work that we do with organisations on all different types of flexibility, we encourage people to undertake trials or pilots. And so we do seek to understand a baseline for kind of productivity measures appropriate to the role in the industry. Sometimes that's self-report, sometimes it's progress against a budget or a completion plan. And what we've seen actually is that there hasn't been any detrimental impact. But it is very much on a kind of case-by-case, client-by-client basis. I think, as Claire said, it's very tricky to really understand beyond a self-report measure the impact that this is having on productivity.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we talk about with hybrid working, of course, is engagement and how we engage with people, and making sure we engage with as much of the workforce as we possibly can in the best way possible. And for some people, obviously, that will mean coming in, and some people that means working remotely, as we've discussed. But what is the effect of hybrid working having on diversity and inclusion within organisations? And I guess, what are the potential long-term impacts on diversity and inclusion when we're working in this way?
I think that hybrid working is definitely throwing up new and different topics of conversation around diversity and inclusion. On the plus side, I think I mentioned earlier that one of the big benefits for employers is that offering roles that can be worked in a hybrid way really opens up a more diverse range of talent. So we are seeing people that are able to access roles that they wouldn't have been able to access if they weren't offered in a hybrid way. We're seeing people actually able to re-enter the workforce who previously wouldn't have been able to work at all. So I'm thinking about, more diverse in terms of geography, but also thinking about particular groups of people. So working parents make up 1/3 of the UK workforce. We've got over 3 million working carers. They're kind of obvious groupings of people for whom hybrid work can bring some real benefits and enable employers to benefit from access to that talent pool that maybe they wouldn't previously have been able to. The same with people with ill health or disabilities. So I think definitely hybrid is giving organisations the opportunity to engage with a different, a more diverse pool of candidates and employees. I think there are other specific groups of people that hybrid working can be really beneficial for. So maybe neurodiverse individuals, Black and minoritized ethnic groups. It can be quite helpful for people to spend some of their working time away from an office environment that they might actually find exhausting, or they may find doesn't enable them to do their best work. So I think there are real opportunities to be grabbed there. On the flip side, there is the potential for some new inequalities to emerge. I mentioned our TimeWise research earlier, and ensuring fairness and inclusion was one of the top 3 areas of concern and focus for the employers that we spoke to in that research. So thinking about, what is the differential between the way people are using your hybrid arrangements? So are there particular groups of people who favour coming into the office, particular groups of people who favour working from home? Is that falling along gender lines or age lines maybe? And what's the knock-on of that? So in itself, that may not appear to be a problem, but does that translate into different experiences of work for those people, differential access to opportunities? Organisations are really needing to think about ensuring there's no detriment to one group of workers over another simply because of the way that they're working. So a lot of the work that we do is encouraging organisations and managers to be aware of this, to notice who's working where within your team. If you're an individual manager, notice where you're working and think about what message does that send to everyone else. And then on an organisational level, I think longer term, we would want to see organisations continuing to look at the impact from an equality perspective of their hybrid approach and their working arrangements, and building that into a kind of organisational process to make sure that you're gathering the right data and that you're really keeping track of the impact this is having on different groups of employees.
I think that's so important. Thank you for sharing that with us. Claire, is this reflected in the research that you're doing?
Yes, I mean, we haven't, the survey I mentioned before didn't look so specifically at issues around access and D&I, but we did see the and actually everyone was interested in flexible working, and I think you can't assume it only works for certain groups, because the demand is there from the whole range of age groups and demographics. But no, that I have seen other interesting recent published research. There was a report published last week by the Work Foundation looking at disability specifically, and people with disabilities felt this could be a great enabler, as Amy said, in terms of opening up job opportunities, but more than 70% were concerned that it could impact career progression if they were not visible in the office. They were sort of marginalised being a home worker, where other colleagues were regularly going to the office. So as Amy said, the importance of making sure you can be as inclusive as you can, and as we said earlier, that performance is measured on outcomes achieved and what you've achieved, not the fact that you're seen in the office. All of this becomes really paramount in making sure we take forward hybrid in a very fair way.
Absolutely. I think picking up on one of the things that Amy was saying as well, this isn't just about teams, is it? It's about managers, and where our managers work kind of sets the culture, doesn't it? And I think we have to be careful, if we're remote working managers, when are we emailing people? When are we seen to be working? Are we seen to be working flexibly, or are we seen to be working from 8 till 8 or whatever that may be? And I think we have a real challenge ourselves, don't we, to set that example to people. And perhaps it's little things like, adding a strapline to your emails. We work flexibly, so please don't expect a response, or I don't expect a response until you're back at work, or whatever it might be. Little things like that I think can help. And I think that has a real effect on people's well-being, I guess, and the way they're reacting with us as teams. But is there any kind of indication whether long-term remote working will have a positive or negative effect on people's health and well-being?
Yeah, I think it's a really mixed picture, this way of working on health and well-being, because on the one hand, we've seen a big increase in musculoskeletal problems because people are sort of static at a desk and kind of perhaps not getting the exercise that you get walking to the office. And we've seen, as you alluded to a little bit there, people feeling fatigued, people higher levels of reported burnout, people feeling they're kind of working and longer hours instead of commuting, and they're kind of stuck at a desk, and equally it's harder to be away from. You don't feel like you're leaving work if you're just kind of closing your laptop on your kitchen table. So those are some of the kind of potential negative, and there's research out there that proves there's been an increase in all those things. But people have also reported benefits in reduced commuting time, benefits in terms of improved feelings of well-being, potentially better work-life balance from being at home and reducing that commuting time. So hybrid working, it's back to this, it needs careful management to make sure that we get the benefits and those improvements in well-being, and don't kind of suffer the downside. So I think the things to be really careful are around colleagues who might feel isolated from long-term home working, encouraging the benefits of being in the office there so they can connect to colleagues. looking at the hours of people are working, and maybe it's choice, but let's make sure that they feel they're in control and that's a choice to work late rather than they're feeling that workload means they have to work late. And making sure people take frequent breaks. And as you say, as a line manager, you can really live that and show that, let your colleagues know, actually, I'm going offline for an hour at lunchtime to go for a walk, or I'm logging off at 4:30 because I want to go to the gym, or whatever. But you can visibly show people and kind of in that way give them permission to take charge of their own diary and workload in the same way.
I think that really is so important, isn't it? But one of the things that I've heard anecdotally is that there's a kind of split along age lines. Is this coming out in either of your research? So what I mean by that is our younger colleagues are keen to get back to the office because they miss that social, whereas some of us who are towards the middle or the end of our careers are happier to stay at home. Is that borne out in either of your researches?
It's interesting because you hear that, but then the research, actually, there's a lot of research showing younger people expect and want to work flexibly, but that might not mean that they always want to be at home, but they expect to have the option to work from home. So, and similarly, it's been sometimes the older managers who are working in a more traditional way and want to go back to working in a more traditional way. So I think it's a bit hard to pigeonhole by age. I think it does depend on people's preferences, where they see they work best. But I think, yes, there is research showing that kind of early career, there are benefits to being in the office, and it makes the onboarding and recruitment kind of process a bit easier if people are able to establish kind of personal and face-to-face contacts with colleagues.
Amy, is this mirrored in what you're doing?
Yes, I think we're actually working with a number of clients at the moment, thinking about the experience of onboarding into this kind of new working arrangements. And I see a kind of increased focus on that experience and of people kind of early in career and how they're engaging with different forms of flexibility. I think what you described, David, was probably particularly marked when it was more enforced working from home. And I think, there was findings at the time of, lockdowns, etc., which were obviously that if you are earlier in career, you tend to be younger and you won't necessarily have the space to work comfortably and work in the best way at home. So I think that was definitely a factor, back when it was more like 100% remote work. But yeah, I would agree that I think there are definite benefits in many cases early in career in connecting to an organisation. And I think the same is true when you're making lateral career moves as well. And I think we see teams being very conscious of that, teams that are putting together charters for ways that they're working that specifically talk about how will we bring new people in, how will we induct them, how will they get a sense of what it means to work within our team. And I think the key thing for us all to remember is that it is possible to do some of that virtually as well. So actually, I think sometimes we can be a little bit blinkered and, assume that in order to understand an organizational culture or, induct into a new role, you have to spend a lot of time physically together with colleagues. And that's definitely part of it. But there are also, great ways of doing that virtually, which people have been developing over the past couple of years. And I think, as with many things in life, I guess a balance of that moving forwards is probably what we need to be looking for. Don't assume that you have to be in person to do some of that connecting, because actually we have all got better at building relationships and connecting virtually.
I guess alongside that, this raises the question that not everybody wants to or can work from home. And I guess, how are we seeing hybrid working as impacting people who can't do their roles at home?
Thank you. I think that hybrid working is increasingly becoming equated with flexible working. So people say flexible working, and for many people where their mind goes is working all or part of your week at home. And actually, it's only one type of flexibility. So almost 50% of the UK workforce work in frontline and client-facing roles where it's harder in many cases to flex the place of work. And I think there is a real danger that over focusing on hybrid we risk a kind of two-tier emergence from the pandemic. So you have a group of people who, like the three of us, can all do their work from home. And then you have a group of, flex have-nots who aren't able to flex place of work and actually don't see flexibility as applying to them. I think that's compounded by the fact that actually many of those roles and sectors are the ones that have significant skills and talent shortages at the moment. So it's really important for employers to think about other forms of flexibility, not just work location. And so I'm talking about, time-based flex. So flexing start and finish times, working reduced hours, flexibility about your shift patterns and the level of input you have into those. All of these types of flexibility are really important for employers to consider. And actually, again, it's worth saying, even for those of us who are in roles where you can work remotely, that isn't necessarily the sort of flexibility that you need and want. You may be very happy coming into the office, but you may want to work 3 days out of 5, for example. So having a range of flexible working options will actually mean that you can make sure that all of your workforce feel that there's something for them, regardless of their role type, regardless of their particular need. We've done a lot of work at Timewise in sectors where on the face of it, you think it would be hard to offer flexibility. So construction sites, hospital wards, schools, and actually it's really important for employers, particularly where you've got a mixed workforce, some people office-based and some people based in a store or on a ward, to think about what's our offer here. Because otherwise the risk is that that group of employees who feel that flex doesn't apply to them because they can't access hybrid work will become disengaged, disenfranchised, and we won't actually get the best from them, and we won't realise those kind of talent benefits, which particularly in the current labour market is really important.
Yeah, and I think getting that wrong is only going to increase that churn, isn't it, and increase that challenge of recruiting people. Claire, what's your view on this?
Yeah, no, I think what we have seen during the last couple of years is a certain amount of forced innovation, even in some of the frontline sectors. So one person that I interviewed, she was a sort of office support worker. She would chat to patients before they went into for long stays in hospital or long operations. And that job had always been done face-to-face, which for some of the patients is a big deal. You get called in, you have this pre-meet, it's not even the day of your operation, but you're having to make the trip up to the hospital and do all of that. And they switch that online. And actually, there's no reason to move that from being online. It's a service that suits itself better to, someone being more relaxed at home and not having to spend a couple of hours out of their day traveling. So I think, technology doesn't solve all our problems, but I think this kind of period of forced innovation does mean we've unlocked more jobs to different ways of working, different types of working, even if it's not always being able to work at home. Possibly there are aspects of the role that can be done at home, and we can start to reinvent some jobs to embrace technology to improve people's kind of quality of work and work-life balance. So I think we need even more of these kind of experiments over the next couple of years to kind of make sure that all roles get the kind of positive benefits that we've opened up.
I think that's really important. I think it's really good to see some positive come out of what has been a terrible couple of years for a lot of people, isn't it? And there has to be some positive, doesn't there? Because we all want something good to happen, and I think that's really positive. But on the other side of that, I don't know who wants to pick this one up first. Is a recent CIPD study shows that some leaders think we'll revert back to traditional ways of working, and I think some leaders would want that. We've seen that, haven't we, with certain people in government have wanted people to go back to traditional ways of working. And I guess really for either of you to pick this up, do you agree that that's likely to happen?
Shall I go first? I think the short answer is no, I don't think it will go back to how it was. I think we've learned too much. I think people have seen what's possible. And I think, as Claire alluded to earlier, people of all different stages of career are now looking for flexibility. I don't think we can kind of put that genie back in the bottle. I think that there was some ONS stats out earlier this month, which said that I think it was around 37% of people now describe home currently as their main place of work. Pre-pandemic, that was kind of 8 to 10% was typical, and it had been like that for a decade or so. So I think even at this stage, people are still describing, you know, a large proportion of people are still thinking of their main place of work being at home. I do think we are seeing some leaders, some organisations who are keen to revert to those more traditional ways of working for a variety of reasons. But alongside that, I can see a healthy debate, taking in a lot of the different elements that we've talked about today. And I think for me, ultimately, I think those organisations who do seek to be overly prescriptive and kind of turn the clock back will ultimately find that they're less competitive in the labour market. So I think we've got this time period now where there is still that debate, and organisations are rightly focusing on how do we embed this, and making sure that we can realise the good things that we've talked about today and avoid some of the challenges. But I don't think we will go back to the way we were pre-pandemic.
No, but I don't either personally. Claire, what is your view on that?
Yeah, I think I've worked with a few civil service departments trying to digest, you know, some of what's happened and been communicated to them. And I think the pushback comes when it feels very arbitrary, like it must be 3 days or 4 days a week, and it's not grounded in a business reason. It feels like it's just because, you know, a sort of parent-child relationship that I feel that you would be better in the office rather than working from home. And I think that really feels like it's not acknowledging all the amazing efforts people have made to keep organizations running over the last couple of years through, you know, pretty difficult circumstances. So if people do want to encourage people back to the office, it needs to be done with genuine reasons and linked to business reasons why this is the right place to do these activities and the right place to work, and make it a kind of much more adult message about why the office is the right place for these activities, rather than sort of this sort of what can feel like a bit of an arbitrary number that without any sort of real clear rationale behind it. And again, whatever approach is implemented needs to be led from the top, because I think we've certainly seen a few organisations say you must go in 3 days a week, and then a lot of the senior managers don't, and it obviously undermines the message quite significantly. But so I think, you know, ground it in a business reason for the role the office plays, and why there's, you know, a need to be there and to connect, and then people will kind of understand that and be much more likely to respect it and live and work in that way.
I think you're right, and I think that's a big change, isn't it? Since certainly since I started my career, we are more demanding of our organisations as individuals within an organisation, and we want to know why. Why are we changing? What's the outcome? What's the benefit of this? What will it look like once we've had that change? And I think that's a lot more challenging for managers and leaders as well, and certainly some of the old-fashioned style leaders. And I think if we were going to ask both of you this, really, and I don't know, Claire, maybe you want to go first. If you fast forward 5 years, how do you think people will be working in 5 years' time? And will this change how we work longer term as well?
Yeah, I mean, certainly from the starting point we're at right now, where we've got this overwhelming majority of people who want to work from home at least some of the time, and you couple that with the labour market we've got, where there's, you know, a record number of vacancies, and so it feels like a sort of candidate market in terms of choosing jobs and choosing where to work. I think if you put the two together, you can only think that hybrid working is here to stay, and that, as Amy said, to remain competitive, organisations need to be able to offer a flexible, you know, a good flexible working approach that people want to work. So if you take that forward, I think that means offices possibly will shrink. Their purpose certainly will change. They become a place to collaborate, and they might look differently, and they might be smaller than they are at the moment. I think organisations will have broader geography, because you don't just have to recruit people who live within 10 miles of the office. You know, you can attract talent from all over the country or even the world. And I know there are organisations taking advantage of that. And I guess changes will make increasing use of collaborative tools and new technology, I'm sure, will pop up all the time to make it easier to work, you know, with colleagues together, asynchronously, but not in the same place, or equally asynchronously, where people are, you know, joining in and participating in creation at different periods of time. And I think the volume has only gone up on health and well-being, and I hope that will remain kind of one of the organisation priorities that supports and works with the hybrid strategy, so that people try and make the most of the positive benefits of hybrid working in terms of health and well-being to kind of counteract some of those risks. So, I mean, yes, it feels like the biggest change in working practices, certainly in my lifetime, but I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that it'll improve, working lives for a lot of people.
I think you're right. Is it interesting you talk about different parts of the world as well, because I think that brings its own challenge, doesn't it? In terms of, if we have a meeting at 9 o'clock, what does that mean for somebody who's in our team in Asia or Africa or the United States? And equally, if we have people from all around the world, how do we manage those different cultures, those expectations, those ethical challenges that we all face that are kind of assumed in one location, but unrecognized when we start to work with other people? And I think there's a big piece of work that needs to be done there to understand how we're going to work together on those things as we go forward. Amy, what's your view on 5 years' time?
I concur with a lot of what Claire's described. I think, what this has already started to do and will continue to do is really change the way we interact with our office space and the role of the office. I think what we will see, and we're starting to see, is the emergence of kind of third spaces where, people are working from an office, but maybe it's not always the same office, or it's not always an office in a major city. It's more local to them. So they're getting the benefit of being in an office, but, not necessarily having to make that commute all the time. So I think it'd be interesting to kind of watch what happens with that trend. I think the other thing that I would just add to the points that Claire made is that I think it will open up the conversation much earlier in the kind of attraction and recruitment process about ways of working. I think we're already seeing a level of confidence in candidates asking questions. And I think, David, you said about being more demanding of employers, but I think that is only a positive trend that can continue, because it means that you're going into any new role, and whatever your circumstances, with your eyes open, because you're asking different questions. I think the thing that will remain consistent, I guess, is the importance of the role of the manager in all of this. And I know we started off the conversation about, some of the things that managers need to be aware of. But, on a practical day-to-day basis, I think that the manager is often the key piece in the jigsaw as to how well this works for a team. So I think that will remain consistent. I think that's probably always been the case, but some of the challenges are a bit different. So I see, managers needing to kind of transcend some of those boundaries of place. And that's not to mention, the kind of work from anywhere piece that you were just talking about, which some organisations are now starting to grapple with and to think about what's possible. And I mean, we had a launch event recently for our research, and we had an excellent employment lawyer on the panel, and she got so many questions about that exact issue. How do we recruit from different geographies, and what does it mean in terms of all of the contractual elements? And I think there's a lot for us to learn from those big multinational global organisations who've obviously been doing this for a while, but it's about bringing that down to an appropriate level if smaller organisations are going to operate that kind of work from anywhere approach. Brilliant.
I think now's probably a good time to have a look at some questions we've had pre-submitted. I believe we've got a couple of questions pre-submitted. The first one is really, really interesting one. Do you feel that remote, this is from Steph, thank you for the question, Steph. Do you feel that by remote and hybrid working, people are damaging their careers? And we touched on this a little bit earlier, thinking about different age groups, but I guess this is a really important question.
Yeah, shall I take this one? I think people are right to be concerned that if you are permanently at home and kind of invisible in some way, that whereas other colleagues are very regularly in the office, including senior managers, there is evidence that there are kind of human biases towards people you see. You think of those people when you might be thinking about opportunities, for development and so on. So it is something we need to be conscious of and kind of make sure we're kind of, again, as we talked earlier about kind of putting in inclusive strategies that guard against some of those sort of human biases that may creep in. So I think in this case, it's really important that managers share opportunities rather than just kind of hand picking maybe certain people for development opportunities. Make sure those are shared and people have the chance to put themselves forward. Make sure you're assessing performance based on outcomes and outputs, not just who you feel is doing a good job because you've seen them working hard or seen them late in the office. That's not a measure of performance. What someone is achieving is a measure of performance. And involving a variety of people, making sure you've got the right people in the room for conversations, even if that's a virtual room. Take that time to kind of make sure the right people are there and have those discussions. I think, the benefit here is this shouldn't just protect against biases against people working remotely. It can help improve, prospects for other people who may face barriers in the workplace, be those, people with disabilities, people with different ethnic backgrounds and so on. So, taking steps towards working in an inclusive way should have more benefits.
Absolutely. Amy, do you want to add anything to that?
I'd agree with what Claire's shared. I think, it's important to remember that, actually it's not just down to the manager as well. So actually being open about some of these biases, talking about them with the team, kind of sharing some collective responsibility for how work is allocated and kind of building that into your decision-making processes, for example, can really help mitigate against that. It's really easy, particularly if you're busy, particularly if you're an organisation that's quite action oriented, to just allocate work amongst the people that are there, or make a decision amongst people who are working on that day in the same place as you are, for example. And I think it's about stopping and checking yourselves as a team before you do that. So actually some of these kind of very small behaviour changes that we can put in place can help with that. And as Claire said, it's about making sure that then benefits a variety of people, whether you happen to be the ones in the office or whether you happen to be the ones at home. Absolutely.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that I don't expect anybody who was expecting to come out of this was almost a new bias in terms of a geographical bias in the way we're working with people. And I think it's really important that you've both flagged that up, because that's a real challenge for managers, isn't it? How do we, the old adage of out of sight, out of mind is really dangerous here, isn't it? And that's, I think, something we all need to be very, very conscious of. We had another question from Mike. And Mike's question, again, a really good question. How do we motivate people to want to come together in a physical way when we've been able to get on with our tasks and deliver remotely over the last few years? Real challenge, this one, I think, for a lot of people. I don't know who wants to go first on this one.
I think Claire sort of mentioned it in one of her earlier answers about actually it needs to not be arbitrary. And I think that's a really good starting point. So actually you're only going to motivate people to want to come together if you can demonstrate that it's valuable to come together. And I think we hear a lot of people saying, oh, you come together to collaborate, or you come together to be creative or innovate. But actually we need to go to the next layer down and say, okay, so which of these activities, which of these projects that we're working on do we actually think is going to be better if we sit down, and at what stage are we going to sit down and physically be together? There is a whole host of tech solutions out there that enable you to collaborate when you're not physically co-located and asynchronously, so not even in the same time space. So I think it's about making the office somewhere that people want to be and that they can see that they're getting value from. And part of that will be the activity. Part of it will be the physical space. And I think, we see a lot of our clients now exploring things like, well, actually, we used to have a monthly meeting of an hour or 90 minutes when everyone was together. Let's make them quarterly, but let's make it a whole day, and let's make it really valuable for people to come in. And maybe there's a continuing professional development focus for part of the day. There's an opportunity for people to connect with people that they don't often work with, because that's obviously what you miss by not coming in physically. So really getting explicit about what do we want the office to be about. We've seen lots of organizations tempting people back with free breakfasts or free coffees, and that will get you so far. But I think ultimately it's got to be combined with a real understanding of what is the activity that is best done together, and how can we point to the benefit of having done it together. When we're reflecting on the work we've done, where have we got to today, and would we not have got as far if we hadn't have physically come together? And I think if you can point to some, you know, concrete examples that people can relate to, they're going to be much more on board with actually, you know, making the effort to travel in and spend time together.
Thank you. Claire, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, no, just well, a practical example, I suppose. Yeah, we've been doing this to ourselves as an organisation, so yeah, that has involved doing some work on the office. We've had a massive clear out, but we've built a shared area. We've put in booths. You know, we've improved the canteen and made that bigger. So more shared areas, more opportunities for people kind of to touch base when they're in the office, and we're repainting and putting up nice pictures and stuff. So make it a place people want to come. And then, as Amy said, pinpointing the activities that are best done together. So actually for us, project kickoffs, particularly with the client involved as well, much nicer to be done in person. Project review actually as well at the end when we're wrapping up. Isn't that nice to come together and let's, you know, buy some nice biscuits or go for a drink afterwards to celebrate that we've done we've completed this project and what we've learned from it. So yeah, I think you know, people will come when they think there's a reason to come. And if you can add in a bit of fun, I don't rule out the pizza idea, you know, and add in a bit of fun to kind of remind people of the social benefits of coming together at the same time, then that's really, yeah, I think then people will come away feeling that they've had a good day and it's been a good use of their time.
Something that we hear people talking about a lot in terms of the value of the office is some of those kind of rituals that are associated with work. So we talked a bit about new joiners earlier, but also, you know, people going on maternity leave or big birthdays or people leaving. I think actually there are some of those things that previously we kind of took for granted a bit, probably for those of us that were often in the office. And, you know, we see a lot in conversations that we're having with clients that actually their employees are telling them we like to come together for some of these rituals because it helps us feel connected to our physical place of work and to our wider team. And I think actually thinking in those terms can be quite helpful if you're a manager and you're not sure where to start, because actually it does all work quite well working from home. You know, some of those elements can be a good place to start talking to your team about this.
We've had a touching on this, and we may have touched on this already in the conversation, but it's a really interesting question from Mark here. And I think Mark asks, what's the future of the office? And I think this is a really interesting question. I know where I am here. A large financial services organization has given up a whole building. They no longer use the building at all. And I guess really that raises the question, what do we think is the future of the office?
I think we've touched on, some people still want a sort of head office as a nominal kind of figurehead place, a place to come, as we said, to connect, to collaborate with colleagues, probably come in for a purpose, for particular meetings, for particular events and so on. So many organizations still feel that their head office serves a purpose. But I think, you know, we've seen an increase in uptake in those sorts of more satellite offices, because actually maybe people could do a lot of those meetings. They don't need to come to London, to Birmingham. They could work from a local site, or even paying for, you know, co-work space desks, so that recognizing people might want a break from their house, but don't necessarily want to schlep an hour and a half on a train. You know, can we enable people to work in different places that are really suited to working? So I think we'll see, probably, as you say, scaled down kind of big offices to something a bit smaller, but perhaps more remote and kind of satellite offices and shared working spaces.
Picking up on shared working spaces, just before I come to you, Amy, do you think we'll potentially ever get to a position, excuse me, where companies are less territorial, shall we say? So there's a shared working space not only for people within an organisation, but for people within different organisations to share the same space and maybe get some additional benefits out of that. Or do you think that's a step too far?
I think it depends. Just again, I've got one example. We looked at renting some space in a place called the Evidence Quarter, which draws together a load of, you know, kind of like-minded research institutes, social bodies, and so on, who all have an agenda. And I can see that's very valuable in terms of people making connections, perhaps partnering together on opportunities. I don't know. I'll leave Amy to comment on whether I could see it working in more competitive sectors, but I could see in certain types of very knowledge-based sectors where you could be co-located with partners, suppliers, then there could be huge benefit in that.
Yeah, I think that's right. The other sector that I was thinking of was, kind of scientific research. So actually, often spin outs from universities or, health organisations co-locating around a particular topic of interest. I think we did see some of that pre-pandemic as well, but I think we're seeing more of that now, that kind of come and be part of our innovation centre, and actually you will have space, and so will teams from other organisations that are working on similar topics. I think we have partnered with an organisation that kind of, I guess, is trying to specialise in this. So actually thinking about where does it translate? So shared office space, where actually the focus is on the shared. So actually co-locating often smaller organisations, I think, who maybe don't have the need for their own head office, as Claire was talking about, but do want space for their team to come together. Maybe there's only going to be a handful of people in from your organisation on any one day. So it makes sense, actually, if you can share some space with others that are doing something similar. I think probably one to watch. I'm not sure that we will see it for, some sectors where, as Claire said, it would be kind of, maybe a competitive disadvantage to having people co-locating in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the relevant questions that's coming through is about salaries, and this is I think a really interesting question. Is it? The two questions around this really: is it reasonable for job applicants to demand the same level of salaries for office-based working when working from home, and saving on travel costs and commute time? And the other question around this really is: do we think remote working will ultimately drive wages down as people try to, as organisations try to cut costs, and in some ways pass those costs on to employees? If we're thinking about office space and, part of your front room or a spare room in your house, whatever it is. And I guess on the wider element, do we think there will come a time when that will become a chargeable asset in terms of individuals? There's almost feels like there's a risk here of county councils getting on the bandwagon and saying, well, that's now business space, we're going to charge you business rates for that spare room you have, or insurance companies saying this is now an office, we're going to charge you more money on your insurance. So lots of things to think about there. But I think if we take the first two questions, do we think it's still reasonable for job applicants to demand the same level of salaries? I don't know who wants to pick up on that. Personally, I have a personal view on this, so I'll start if you like. My personal view is yes. And I say yes because the travelling costs in most cases, in my own personal experience, have not been picked up by an employer. So almost what difference does that make to me as an employer? How you get to work and what that costs you is not really my concern, but that might be a bit brutalistic. I'm happy to be swayed on that. Sorry, Claire, do you want to?
Okay. I was only going to go back to the job market we're in at the moment. So, and we've seen it in the press, companies rumoured to be cutting back, we're going to take 10% off salaries because you're commuting. That's the sort of thing will damage your employer brand and make it hard to attract new people. I think, the pay should be based on what you deliver, not where you're based. And I've always thought, okay, there's a reducing commuting costs, but actually in the winter I've got to pay my lighting and my heating. So, and lunch and coffees and stuff are not provided like they might be in an office. So there's still costs involved with working at home. And I think if you start getting petty about reducing costs on commuting, then people could say, well, actually, I need you to pay my broadband, my electric, my coffee, all the things that I would have got if I worked in the office. So I'm not sure it's a wise line to pursue.
No.
I would agree. I think that we have seen examples in the press, haven't we? There was a law firm where the headline was that they were going to slash 20% off, salaries for people that were working remotely. I think actually there's often a lot of complexity behind this. So I think some of the things that organisations are grappling with around, if they operate a kind of London weighting or large city allowance, for example, there are questions around whether that should persist, whether it should translate into a working from home allowance. I think actually a number of organisations recruited during the pandemic from people who were not geographically based locally and actually didn't necessarily have a plan. And I think that's partly what we're seeing now, a bit of a fallout where people are trying to kind of work out what's fair and reasonable, where you've got people who are working and living hundreds of miles away. And so I do think we're seeing a little bit of fallout around that. But, I think we would say it's not a good idea to be paying less simply because of your flexible working arrangements. It should be about the work that you're doing. I would bring us back to the point that we talked about earlier around who can and cannot access flex. And actually what we see with some of our clients is that, you know, those roles that I talked about earlier, the nurses, the construction workers, the teachers, the shop assistants, where you cannot access working from home as part of your role, certainly not on a regular basis. You are still obviously paying your travel costs. And actually, in many cases, those roles are the ones that are attracting lower salaries within the range within an organisation. So I do think that is something that employers need to look at. And it's all the more reason to look at what can be offered to those people as an alternative to hybrid working that enables them to get some of the benefits around time-based flex.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think one of the things that occurs to me as we're speaking, and I want to make time for another question, but one of the things that occurs to me as we're speaking is we never differentiated between the travel costs of people coming into the office. We didn't say, for example, you know, you live 2 miles away, you're on a one bus in London at £1.40 or whatever it is, and I'm in Norwich and it's costing me £100 to come into the office. We never made those distinctions. So I think you're absolutely right. Trying to make those distinctions now because people are no longer commuting is very arbitrary, isn't it? And it's just it feels a bit humbug, if I'm honest. Right, we've got time for one more question. Have we got another question, guys? A question from Sharon then. Love the notion of a long pilot and its extended experiment. How well are people learning in the midst of this experiment, and what's helping with that learning? Who wants to pick that one up first?
Shall I start and then I'll pass to Claire? I think that you know, it was a bit of an enforced experiment for many people. So I think, you know, actually what's really helpful is if you, as an organisation, have taken a considered approach to this. So if at some point you have put a marker in the sand and said, this is going to be our hybrid approach and we're going to trial it and we're going to seek feedback, because if you've done that, then you've probably thought about what some of the measures of success might look like, and you can probably monitor against those. So I think that really helps, as with any experiment, I guess. You know, we were all kind of thrust into this, but at some point over the past couple of years, you know, many organisations have stopped and said, okay, what are we going to do moving forwards? And actually, what type of organisation is it that we're seeking to build here? What's our vision for actually how we want our ways of working to be? So then you've got something to measure against. And just the other thing I would point to is the value that I think many of our clients have seen, and I think this is mirrored across organisations, those organisations that are going out and talking to their people regularly about this through surveys, through listening activity. I think, again, it's helping them make more informed views about what longer term arrangements should look like, and actually the impact that the policy or the guidance, whatever it is they've produced, is having on their people.
Brilliant. Thank you, Amy. Claire, to you for the final comment, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, my key point would have been the same one around listening, just making sure you have the forums in place to chat to staff, both, you know, formally through surveys, but informally talking to people. How's it going? What's working? What's not working? I think setting out that we're not going to get it right first time. Particularly because the world is still evolving. You know, we were about to kind of reduce all of our rules in our office, and now the you know, there's another big COVID wave and infections are going back up, and it doesn't feel like the right time. So it's constantly changing and evolving. So continuing the dialogue with staff is really important to make sure that we're working in a way that kind of works for them and for the organisation. And I think, and the final point about what helps is the point we made earlier about equipping managers. So where managers feel confident and comfortable to check in with people, to handle kind of one-to-one difficult situations someone might have, to put in place things in their team that will help it work smoothly, and to be doing those feedback discussions with the team and feel comfortable to ask open questions. And that is different for managers, because a lot of people like a clear policy. They like to know the answer and what the rules are. And this is one of those times where there might not be, and there certainly isn't the same answer for everybody. People are going to need this to look different depending on their personal circumstances and their role requirements. So equipping managers in terms of what helps and making sure they're supported is absolutely critical to getting it right.
Brilliant. Thank you. And a huge thanks to both of you. It's been a very, very interesting conversation. I'm going to hand back to Craig now, who's going to close us down.
Thank you. So yeah, that's it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who joined us, and thank you to David, our host, and speakers Claire and Amy. And so don't forget, if you're a CMI member, you can log into Management Direct using the link in the live chat, and you can find a wide range of exclusive practical development resources and much more. And if you're not yet a member or subscriber, you can join our community via the link that's also in the live chat to gain full access to our Management Direct portal. You can also sign up to the free CMI newsletter for the latest trends and tips for managers and leaders. Please also take a few moments to let us know your thoughts on today's event by completing the evaluation form. The link is also in the live chat. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your day.